Hello and welcome to FACTS webinar, Taking Your Animals Across the Finish Line. I'm Samantha Gasson, FACTS Humane Farming Program Director, and I will be moderating the session. Thank you for joining us. Before we dive right in, let me take a minute or two to do a few quick introductions. Food Animal Concerns Trust, or FACT, is a national nonprofit organization that works to ensure that all food-producing animals are raised in a humane and healthy manner. We accomplish this by supporting humane farmers through our humane farming program, promoting policies that make foods from animals safe and healthy to eat through our Safe and Healthy Foods program, and generally help consumers make informed food choices. Please visit our website at foodanimalconcernstrust.org to learn more about our farmer services. As always, I would like to thank my wonderful colleague, Catherine Hoke, who is joining us, and she will help with fielding questions. And with the way my internet was behaving yesterday, she may be saving us. We'll see. Hopefully not. It's been okay so far today. So this time I'm delighted to introduce one of my favorite people in the world, and that's Lee Menas with NC Choices. Lee is a North Carolina State University animal science graduate and has worked in the local food scene for over 20 years. He owns and operates wild turkey farms in China Grove, North Carolina, which is one of the Charlotte area's longest running small farms, providing pasture-raised meats direct to consumers and restaurants. Lee has worked with Cooperative Extension, Rowan County Soil and Water Conservation District, and NC Choices, where his work has focused on educational projects and working with producers to develop effective pasture grazing systems. Throughout his career, Lee has led numerous workshops and producer trainings on topics such as business planning, processing, and outdoor swine production. We are incredibly lucky to have the amazing Lee with us today. So without further ado, Lee, I will turn the floor over to you. Take it away.
All right. Thanks. I'm kind of impressed. That was a nice intro. Thank you.
Yeah, I made you sound really good, didn't I?
I need to also makes me realize I need to update my bio. Yeah, we have owned and operated wild turkey farms here in China Grove, Salisbury area, middle of the state since '97, and kind of slowed down on the raising meats the last couple of years. So I tell everybody, I said I'm not sure whether I'm retired or recovering, but I lean more towards the recovering components of things. So anyway, yeah, thank you, Sam. My name's Lee Menas. I do work with the NC Choices program, and for those of y'all that are not familiar with us, we're a program of the Center for Environmental Farming Systems and NC State University Extension. And we've been around for about 20, 25, 26 years now. It's been a while, but our whole focus of our program is on pasture-raised meats and the supply chain that kind of follows along with that. So we work a little bit on production on the farm side of things. We work a lot with meat processors and regulators in the middle, and then as well as on the market end of things a little bit. So yeah, today let's talk about taking your animals across the finish line. You know, how do you put that cow in the race car and get him to where you want him to go at the end of the day? And so as we talk about a finish line, what we're looking at and what I'm talking about is how do we get that end product as direct to consumer marketers and meat marketers. We're I always say back in the 90s when I started this, the thing was, be a price maker, not a price taker, and that we're cutting out the middleman, and we're going to keep the middleman's profit because we're going to cut him out and put that money in our pocket. But one thing about it is we move into these more direct to consumer marketing avenues, it really does shorten that supply chain, which is nice. And that's the point of it, is getting to know your consumer, and the consumers getting to know their farmers. I said, but at the end of the day, what we've done is we've shortened that chain up considerably over what a commodity chain is. So if you're a commodity meat producer, beef, pork, whatever, and you're putting animal carcass out and into commerce, and it ends up in the grocery store and on somebody's plate, and they have a good experience or they have a bad eating experience, either one, the chances of them finding you and giving you a direct complaint about it are probably slim to none. But as we move and we're in farmers markets or we're selling directly off the farm, we shorten that supply chain to the point that that consumer knows exactly where to find you if they don't have a good eating experience. And so it's really important to keep that in mind as we move forward because our whole goal here is to not only, make money at this, but we want to attract those customers. We want to retain those customers and keep them as, hopefully would be lifelong customers and friends, and some of them even come close to becoming family, in that point. But we want to make sure they have a good eating experience. And that's a really important part because we're asking for their trust. We're asking for, in a lot of cases, a premium price on a product that they can appreciate. So we want to provide that for them. So I'm talking about evaluate and finish. What am I generally talking about? Depending on the species, I'm talking about the amount of finish or fat as is how it gets referred to a lot of times. But we could be talking about a specific weight or specific age as well. So, why is it important? From a meat quality standpoint, we want to make sure that we're providing a good quality product. If any of you have purchased breeding stock in particular, but as well as like stocker calves and stocker feeder pigs and such, we want to maximize their genetic potential because genetics are not cheap. If you've bought breeding stock in the last couple of years, you've known it's grown and gone up really, uh, increased significantly in those few years. But think of it as, when we're paying for that, what we're paying for is that genetic potential of an animal. We're paying for its growth. We're paying for its potential for growth, its potential for mothering ability, its potential for meat quality. We're paying for all that genetic potential within those animals. And so when we make an investment like that, we really want to make sure that we're given a chance to maximize that genetic potential. Back to the race car analogy. Um, you think about it, it's like a race car. If you've got a race car that, has a top end of 200 miles an hour, you want to make sure you put it on a long enough track that it has time to get up to that top speed. So you can get the full potential out of that race car. If we take that car and we put him on a 100 yard dash, we're probably not maximizing the potential of that race car. The same thing here. We want to make sure we give a long enough time for these animals to develop and reach that genetic potential in the finish. The other thing is, when it comes to properly finishing, it costs us money. If we're too early or we hold that animal too long and overfinish it, or we underfinish it by finishing it early and killing it early, we've wasted time and we've wasted feed. And if we've kept that animal too long and taken them past a good finish point, then we've also added risk because anybody that's kept animals for any length of time knows that every day you have an animal around is just another possibility for that animal to drop dead. So keep that added risk in mind. So when are they ready? Well, a lot of that's going to depend on your genetics and your feed program. You'll see a lot of university and extension publications that you can look if you're new to raising meat animals and you're trying to get a feel for like, okay, what can I do? How long do I need to invest? What's that time look like? It's really going to vary. A lot of information on commodity markets, feedlot beef, house-raised pork, house-raised chicken. Um, but when it comes to local and pasture raised, a lot of it's just going to depend on what your genetics are and what your feed program is. The importance of that feed program is we really want to make sure we have a good source of feeds that is meeting the genetic requirements of those animals because genetics, a cow is not a cow. And when we look at breeds, Angus is different from a Charolais. Charolais is different from a Longhorn steer. But also within some of these breeds, we have enough genetic variation that we need to take into account what type of animal within that breed we have as well. Because if you look at Angus as a breed, you can find everything from really small framed Angus that are going to grow really quickly to these really large, more show type cattle that have other exotic type influences on them. Sometimes for planning purposes, especially if you're starting out and you're kind of evaluating and like, all right, do I want to get in the meat business and what do I need to do to plan to get ready for it? Sometimes for planning purposes, we have to set a goal and work backwards. And we think about, our markets. So if we're looking at this time of year and we're thinking that um, we we want to have animal or we want to have product ready for a specific market and time of market, say that April farmers market, we that can be our goal. So if we're going to start with then, that's when we need to be ready. Then we've got to work backwards off of that and evaluate, what's our growth potential, what size animals do we need to have at this point, and make sure we're on track. Sometimes that can be um, a target carcass weight. When we think of things that we're looking for, those goals we're trying to reach, it could be a target carcass weight, it can be a target finish, and even in a post-COVID world, it can be a target kill date. Um, so let's look at the carcass weight. So a lot of times, depending on your species, like chickens, for example, we may be targeting that, we want a specific size broiler to meet our market requirements. So we may want to be looking for a 4.5 pound carcass weight, or if we have a big cut up market and we're looking for birds that are a little bit bigger and better yield that we can cut up, then we may be going heavier to like 5.5 or 6 pound carcass weight. But the carcass weight tends to be our end goal there, and not necessarily a layer of fat per se. When I talk about a target finish or that fat, that's generally what we think of in a beef cattle assessment. When you're looking at beef, we tend to start looking at how much fat cover have they put on and using that visual outside appearance as a manner of evaluating and estimating what that inside product is going to look like. Once again, the carcass weight can also apply to a pig. We tend to think more of like, we're after a 250 or a 225 pound carcass weight for whatever market we're in. And those carcass weight targets will be established by, what yields work for you, what your customers want, um, and what just works with your program. Unfortunately, in like I said, in the post-COVID world, sometimes we have to work with the kill dates we can get. Currently, I see we've got several people that chimed in. They were outside of North Carolina. So anything I say processing relating, I'll give you my disclaimer that anything I mention processing relating is really going to be focused on what's happening here in North Carolina, because that's where our little bubble is. And so it may be a little bit different if you're in different parts of the country. Currently here in North Carolina, I think we're seeing a lot of relief from that post-COVID or that COVID bubble we saw, where we were seeing backups at processors of 6 months to a year. I think most of the processors have dates opening up in a reasonable amount of time. So what we saw during COVID, when we saw this rush of people into local meats, is we were seeing those processors booked out a year and a half in advance. And so a lot of times us as producers, we're looking at it and going, all right, well, I've got a kill date, in January of 2027, a year and a half out or year and a half out. And now I've got to think about my production and backing into it so that I can have animals ready when I get to that target date and not having that much flexibility around it. Like I said, fortunately, I think we're kind of seeing that. We're seeing that pass by at this point. One thing that's really important, though, is we're looking for finish and where those animals are in the process. We need to constantly be evaluating them all the time. I really advise that, if you're doing this and you're raising animals and this is really something you're seriously trying to get better at your meat quality and seriously trying to get better at your product, making better product, try to make a habit out of stopping and evaluating those animals periodically, weekly, every other week, etc. And another thing that'll help you is if you start writing that stuff down, break out a notebook. Kind of, it doesn't have to be anything complicated. If you got a group of pigs, make note once a week. All right, this Friday, December, whatever it is, Um, you know, 17 pigs in this group, estimated 175 pounds, seem to be in good condition. Just make some basic notes, but force yourself to take a critical look at those animals, how they're growing, how they're filling up in both fat and muscle structure, and that will force you to become observant. It's easy enough to say, "Hey, I'm gonna walk by there and I'm gonna look at this pasture full of animals," but if I force myself to write it down, then I now have made myself translate what I'm seeing in my eyes onto pen and paper, and I go through that thought process of describing what I'm seeing, and that makes me better because your brain, when you do things like this, it kind of works as a just a muscle memory. If you look at anybody, good athlete that trains, they train repetitive training, so they develop muscle memory, so they automatically know what to do when a certain situation arises. And what we want to get is we want to get good at when we look at animals, we automatically are evaluating them in our head, and we're thinking of, where are they? Are they where they should be? And are they going to be where we need them to be when the time gets here? And keeping good records. Like I said, just write this down. Doesn't have to be anything complicated. But if you're tracking that progress, you're developing that muscle memory in your brain and developing an eye for the growth of those animals. And it's really important because while we're talking about the visual evaluation of these animals, it's really important that these records also be reconciled against what you get back. If you look at this picture that just popped up, this is actually a pork loin. This was at a meat processor we went to. Um, Probably 4 inches of back fat on this pork loin. And so from an outward appearance of that live pig, my guess is it looked like it was filled out pretty good. It looked like it had a good layer of fat. But if I don't reconcile what I've seen visually on that live animal with what I'm getting back to the processor, I may not make the connection that, my feed program is off and I probably should have had a better protein to carbohydrate ration for my pigs to grow on. So keep good records, compare what you're seeing live against what you're getting back, and then, let that help build and guide your program. So moving forward, we talk about cattle. We really look at that finish. I don't know what the species breakdown of all y'all that are on here. I'll try to cover a couple different things, but I'm going to talk about cattle because that's kind of really our main species that we look at for visual cues when we evaluate finish. And when we're looking at these cattle to evaluate them, we're looking at fat development within or on the outside of that carcass, really. And so the points we're looking at is in this first picture, we're looking at that brisket area. As that animal starts to put on fat, that brisket will start fattening up. As that muscle develops, those shoulders will kind of push out. You'll see a nice square stance on that animal, and you'll see that brisket fill out. As you move forward, look at them from the side, over the tops of the hips. We should start seeing those hips, the hooks and the pins. Those hip bones disappear as that muscle fills out, and then the fat deposits between the skin and the muscle. Those hip bones will become less prominent. We'll start to see that flank fill out, as you can see here. That back leg will start filling out. This flank will become smooth as meat and fat fills in here on the back of the rib cage. And then same thing across the front of the shoulder. That front shoulder will start filling out with muscle, then it'll smooth up as that finish goes on. And then across the shoulders and across the loin, the same thing. We'll see that filling out of the muscle, and then we'll see that smoothing up of the carcass. Now, the last picture here, we'll see the tail head. The reason I chose this animal is red shows these tail head a lot better than these black cattle do. But if you look here on the left side, looking at him, you can see this little wrinkle. And so tail heads are generally a decent visual cue of where that animal is with fat deposition on its body. And also comes in handy because if you've got animals in a feed bunk, It tends to be hard to get when they're side by side and crammed in there. It's hard to look at them from the side. It's hard to look at them from the front when they got their head down and in the feed bump. But we can walk down the back of them and we can look at those tail heads and make a quick evaluation and kind of figure out who's ready or who's a little further ahead than others. So, talking about reconciling our record keeping and visuals, these three animals were from a project we did a few years ago at NC State's beef farm in Raleigh, and they came to us, or actually, I was talking to the manager there, Matt, and he had these three animals that he had been finishing and was going to slaughter them, and they were going to market them as wholes, halves, and quarters to some folks. And so we saw a good opportunity to do a little, feedlot to plate type following through. Now, these three animals was nice because being from the beef unit, we knew exactly when they were born. We had weights on these animals at certain points in their life. Matt, having been the manager for several years, also knew the genetic makeup and potential of these three. And so myself and Matt Morrison, the beef unit manager, and Dr. Matt Poor, our NC State beef specialist, decided to take this project and just follow them all the way through Piedmont Custom Meats cut table. And so we went out that one day and we were taking some video of them for a little project we were putting together to show them at the state cattlemen's meeting. And we're all out there and just decided, all right, everybody pick your favorite steer. If you had to visually look at an animal and pick one for your freezer, which one would you pick and why? And so looking at these three animals, we have a red baldy steer, a black baldy steer, and a black heifer. And if you look at them and you look at them in the front, the heifer is got a really nice finish on her. The steer, same way. This red one's a little on the thinner side. All three nice animals, but my pick of the litter was this black cow. If you look at her, she's really deep bodied. She's really filled out. She's nice and smooth. Had nice muscle structure about her, and a nice finish, a nice visual finish. That was my pick. Dr. Matt Poor, his pick was this middle black baldy steer. And he was like, well, I think he's got a little bit of height on him, may not be quite as finished, but overall, a really nice yielding steer. When asked Matt, who was the one that's visually finished, been appraising these every day, and also has the advantage of having several generations of visual evaluation compared to what he actually got back when they had him slaughtered. He says, I will hands down take this red steer all day long. Okay, a little bit thin in my opinion of the three, but all right, let's hear your reasoning. This one is half Angus. He's a quarter Jersey and a quarter Hereford. The middle one here, I think, was 3/4 Angus, quarter Hereford, and then the black Angus heifer over here was straight Angus. He says, out of the three of these, he says, this is the third generation of siblings I've killed. And the results, he says, I can tell you right now, that black heifer over there will not have a stitch of marbling to her. These are actual ribeye steaks out of each one of these steers. And so the reason I bring this up in that long-winded story is to tell you that sometimes exactly what you see on the outside doesn't quite match up with exactly what's happening on the inside. So this is why it's important to not only do the visual appraisal, but also relate that back and keep good notes and relate it back to the product you're getting so that you can constantly be improving on your genetics and your feed program moving forward. But you can see here, this red one, we actually did some grading on these. This one appeared to top out somewhere in the low to mid choice. Low prime. This black baldy was somewhere in the mid choice range. And this heifer was probably on the high select. So, significant difference in marbling. We also saw a much better yield in this red one. Um, yeah, it was an interesting project and a nice eye-opening project because it brings it back around. You got to know the whole thing. If you're not familiar with them, this is a body condition scoring chart. When you start writing down things and start making notes, these are good. This is a good translation because this is a standard 1 through 9 chart. You can find these pretty much if you do a body condition score for cattle chart on Google, you'll pop up with 16 different ones. I think every university out there, the extension program has one for all the species. But basically, what you're doing is you're translating what you're seeing visually happening with that animal and her body condition, and then assigning it a number. And so that number 1 through 9, one being emaciated, means that cow is really probably within a couple of days of needing a backhoe operator called in to put her in the ground. And then on the other end of the scale, you have 9, which is an extremely, extremely fat animal. If you are familiar with body condition scoring in cattle, chances are it comes from presentations on it. We use body condition scoring a lot when we evaluate our breeding animals. And so, like our breeding herd of cows, we want our cows in a certain body condition. And so, when we think about it, and a lot of the information that we see on body condition scoring, especially here in North Carolina, is applied towards body condition scoring of that breeding herd. And in those breeding herd, we want something a little bit different than we're looking for finish. In that breeding herd, we're really looking for those moderately conditioned cows. We want cows that are ready to be bred. They've got enough weight, fat on them, that they're not in poor condition, that they have the energy levels, they'll breed back readily, and then they'll have a calf and they'll provide enough milk for that calf. If we get into too fat or too skinny cows, we start compromising fertility as well as milk production. But when we're talking about meat animals now, we probably want to carry it a little bit higher. So instead of looking for that 5.5 cow, we're probably looking for somewhere up here in the 7 to 8 range, depending on what our market is. And it may be a little bit lower. If you're doing a full grass fed, you know, um, you may be targeting something a little bit on the leaner side. So I'm not saying anything's wrong or right, but you want to figure out where you need to be for your market. And these um, body condition scoring charts give you a nice way of visually transferring what you're visually seeing in the condition of that animal into a number. So when you're writing down in your record books, you can say cow number 12, she was looking a little thin. I would put her at a 3 to 3.5, 4, somewhere in there. Need to get some weight on her versus this other cow or steer in the pasture. This at a 7, and he's going to be ready to go sooner rather than later. So leave these as tools. There are also body condition scoring charts available for pigs. Same thing, low number 1, they 1 through 5. Same thing with sheep and goats. 1 being lower number being the poorer conditioned animal, and then the upper end of the scale being the fatter obese animals. So when we think about we've taken these animals, we've invested in the genetics, we've taken care of them for anywhere from 6 or 8 weeks for a chicken to possibly 3 years or better that we've spent breeding and getting that calf on the ground and finishing that calf out. So we really want to make sure that not only have we given that animal the production and management it needs to reach its potential, but we also want to think about taking across that finish line as getting them to the processor and getting them that meat cooler with as high meat quality as we can. So we really want to not neglect the step of going to our processor and those last 24 or 48 hours being working against all that hard work we put into those animals. So before we go to the processor, take those animals off feed. They really need to be off feed for 12 to 18 hours before slaughter. Not before you take them to the processor, but before slaughter. So if you're taking them on Monday and they're going to kill them on Tuesday, you can give them feed right up till they walk in. They'll have time to clean out before they take them into slaughter. If you know you're taking them on Tuesday morning and they're going to kill them Tuesday afternoon, then you probably want to pull them off of feed the evening before. They're going to protest a little bit, but it's okay. You want to make sure you provide clean water. What we want to do is provide that animal the water, but take away the feed so that gastro system has time to kind of clean out before it gets to the processor. Because if you think about it, when we start talking about product contamination, if they go in, they have a full gut. When that processor goes to open them up, if that gut's full of hay and rumen, gas and feed, then what we're looking at is a lot more space being taken up in that body cavity, and therefore increasing the risk that they could end up the processor end up accidentally sticking a gut and contaminating the insides while they're doing it. Sorry, my furry doorbell alarms are going off right now. If you can hear that in the background. So, but providing clean water helps that food get on through there and get out of the way. If you're going in, same thing with mud or manure that may be caked onto that animal, you may need to take it and wash it off, because every time they stick a knife through it, if there's excess mud or manure on, every time that knife goes through the skin, you can be pushing mud and manure up against your muscle. And therefore that puts dirt on the carcass. And then when dirt gets on the carcass, that means that they're going to have to trim it, which directly relates to trim loss on your money out of your pocket. If you're washing animals, consider the temperature outside, and you're washing pigs off and it's 20 degrees and they've got a 2-hour ride ahead of them. You want to wash them ahead of time and bed them down so that they have a chance to dry off and that they stay warm, and you're not providing a temperature cut for those animals. Also, ideally, the day you're loading those animals isn't the first time they've seen a trailer. Animals are creatures of habit, and they like stability, and they like to be used things they're used to. And if they've never seen a truck and a trailer come through the pasture, and you pull in there to load them up, they're going to get excited. And the stress levels are going to go up and have an effect on your meat quality. So clean out and bed down your trailer. Also consider biosecurity, because not only are we need to worry about the animals we're taking now, but we don't want to drag anything back from the processor that could compromise the quality of brand that's down the road. If you have a chance, I highly recommend the beef quality assurance and pork quality assurance programs. They focus a lot on handling the animals in a manner that focuses on keeping good carcass quality. So one of the forgotten steps is proper loading and hauling. Once said, again, not having that day be the first time they've ever seen a trailer, but also having proper trailer and thinking about proper hauling and setup to take those animals around. Highly recommend, if you've got to ratchet strap a cow down to a flatbed, you sure shouldn't stop at the gas station, because you're going to end up on the internet and get 15 minutes of fame. A few things to consider. Like I said, if it's cold, make sure those animals are bedded. Make sure they've got enough room to be able to move around. They're not packed too tight. But at the same time, you want to make sure that as you're hauling them, they're not packed too loosely. So if you have a trailer that has cut gates, make sure you use those effectively. If you think about, so this picture of the pigs down here, you can tell they're in a pretty long trailer, and there's only, 6 pigs in there. If you've got one pig and you've got him on a 20 some foot trailer and you're hauling it down the road, you want to make sure you got the cut gate shut so that pig doesn't have access to that whole trailer. So think about it this way. If you're heading down the road and that pig's back there and he's peeking out the back window or the back tailgate of there, he's waving to some little kid back there in the minivan behind you, and all of a sudden somebody pulls out in front of you and you have to slam on brakes, that little 250-pound pig has just now become a 250-pound projectile that has approximately 27 foot before it meets an abrupt stop at the front of the trailer. That will have an adverse effect on your meat quality. So making sure these animals are properly secured. With the poultry here, you can see they're in these crates. These crates are actually designed specifically for chickens or turkeys, etc., because they're designed where the animals can't get up, move around, flap around, and cause carcass damage, pull tendons, strain legs, and such. Another thing is when if you're going to a meat processor, especially if it's a new one you're going to, kind of scout it out beforehand, know what you're getting into, know what nothing is more stressful than getting somewhere and realizing that you have to back up 200 yards to loading dock and you're not any good at backing more than 20 feet. And you don't want to end up like this because when you get stressed, the animals get stressed, and when it's just not good on anybody. So we hear a lot about the one bad day philosophy and animal welfare discussions. And so we take this animal, we raise them for up to 3 years, and we treat them and love them and take care of them. And we only want them to have one bad day. Let's change that view to let's shoot for how about just as few of bad seconds as we can possibly have. And that means that when we get them there, we want them handled smoothly. We want to let our plant staff assist. We want to be mindful of our biosecurity, that we're not tracking into the pens and getting manure from other animals and then walking back on our trailer and then hauling something home to our animals. We want to make sure the processors we're working with are places we're offloading, they have proper facilities, they're good design, they're well maintained. They should, according to humane slaughter, they have to provide shade and water and such. If it's hot in the summer, they need to provide air movement fans, and then if it's cool, especially in the winter, providing some sort of windbreak that they're not out in the open. But basically, we want to minimize the stress on the animals all we can, and ourselves, because once again, if you're stressed, you tend to make the animals stressed as well, and that's no fun on any of us. Once again, those BQA and PQA programs also focus on transporting of animals and handling animals. So once again, they're really good programs to participate in. So as we look at that handling, especially there towards the end, going to the processor, you got to think about that carcass damage that occurs from that as money out of your pocket. And so we want to make sure that we avoid that at all costs. And that's things like bruising, broken bones, um, and then it can also mean things such as PSE, which stands for pale, soft, and exudative, or dry firm and dark firm and dry pork. Many of you may have heard of dark cutters in beef, and that's all of these are directly related to that handling of the animal. So bruised and broken bones, that's pretty straightforward. In the handling, if those animals are pushed around or in bad facilities, they can get bruised or beat up, or they can go. You can see these wing tips here. These are a result of poor stockmanship due to catching and loading and such. You see the damage to the wing tips and a zero being good, everything's good. Then you see that slight damage as red tips. You see as it gets worse, you start seeing that damage and bruising in the joints here. And then eventually it can get bad enough that the entire wing can be trimmed, have to be trimmed out and discarded. And so once again, that's however much you're getting per chicken or per pound on chicken wings that's going in the trash can at the processors due to poor handling. Things like PSE, DFD, and dark cutter beef, these are stress related, and so they can have a genetic potential. Some breeds are a little bit more um, uh, likely to suffer from these, but most of this is actually in a handling. And so what happens in most of these cases is lactic acid buildup. To walk you through quickly what happens when muscle becomes meat, the transformation that takes place is after the animal dies, you have sugars that are trapped in the meat, and those sugars are converted to lactic acid, and then that lactic acid causes a drop in the pH of the meat, and that's what starts that breakdown of meat cells and such. And so if we stress that animal ahead of time and they're not handled well, they're loaded roughly, they're they're just mistreated in some way, shape, or form. They get, and this is especially true if you have nervous animals. We've all had those cows that are just plumb crazy, and pigs that, you look at them wrong and they try to jump out of the pen. Those type animals are going to be more susceptible to this too, because what's happening is they're getting spooked or they're being handled roughly, and they're using up that sugar reserve in a stress response. That stress response then causes that lactic acid to build up prematurely, and then that lactic acid dissipates over time. And so what happens is we've had that pH drop occur ahead of time. And so when the animal is actually slaughtered, it's turning around and it's not getting the pH drop. And so that affects the meat and causes it to take on different qualities. As you can see in this demonstration of pork chops here, a normal one's in the middle. A PSE means that it's pale, it's soft. Exudative means it's releasing more moisture. You can see the amount of moisture that leaked out of it. Moisture is money, folks. If you are losing this much water content out of your meat, you're you're decreasing the quality of that meat and the tastiness of that meat, the tenderness of that meat, but you're also losing pounds of water across the entire carcass. If it comes in and it's dry, the dark, firm, and dry, you can see it's similar to like a dark cutter in a beef here on the right. This is a normal ribeye steak. This is a dark cutter on the right side of this picture. Same thing, but it's actually that water is not, it's not getting out of there. And so that drop in pH also causes other issues like hydrogen sulfide can build up in it because of the lack of the pH drop in it. And so it can actually drastically affect your shelf life of your meat products, as well as turn them rancid much quicker and have a bitter taste or smell to that meat that would not be pleasing to your customers. So once again, when it comes to this stuff, think about those BQA and PQA programs. Really quickly, I'm just going to touch on working with your processor. Processors are such an important part of this. They're going to be 30 to 40% of your overall expense in getting meat to market. And so you need to really think of them as a business partner of yours, and find a processor that you can work with, a processor that you're comfortable working with, and that y'all can communicate back and forth. Because at the end, you really need to make sure you're communicating your issues with each other, and as well as your expectations, and so that they're producing a good product for you, you're being a good customer for them. Because at the end of the day, processors are not magicians. You got to give them something good to start with. And so when challenging situations arise, just remember sometimes they're not always at fault. So if you educate and you commit to each other's success, hopefully you'll both have successful businesses and be around for a long time. This is my contact information. If you would like to reach out to me, once again, with the NC Choices program at NC State University.
Thank you, Lee. That was really great. And Lee and I actually took a course together covering all of the was it PSE and all that stuff. I didn't even know anything about any of that. And it was interesting. The guy who talked about that, just how closely related handling is leading up to processing, and then even like hours before processing. It was really interesting. I think it's
and the really interesting thing is once you start looking into the PSE and the DFD and the dark cutter stuff, you can go to the grocery store, you can find it all.
oh yeah.
We
Yeah.
were talking about that in that class. It's like it's there. And sometimes people he said, they had one company, they got mad when they pointed it out and suggested they change because that's this product they'd produced for 80 years and that's what their customers like. So
Yeah. All right. I am going to let you take a break, Lee, and let everybody in the audience pull together their thoughts and put questions in the Q&A. And I'm going to run my poll. the poll actually really does help us with getting funding for this program, so that we can continue to offer these webinars for free. So if you wouldn't mind filling those out, that would be great. And Catherine, you want to? Right now, we only have one question in the Q&A, which is great, but it's actually a really good question because I already looked at it. So do you want to go ahead and ask that,
Yeah,
Catherine?
absolutely. All right. So Todd asks, do you agree that hang time is less critical with younger animals? For example, 3 to 5 days sufficient for a 7-month-old lamb versus a 2-year-old steer? And then there's some more questions after that.
Okay. So when we talk about hang time or dry aging, in local meat world, we tend to have most of our processors focus on some sort of dry aging time frame. In the commercial, as compared to like commodity market, um, they do what they call wet aging. So dry aging, more in the niche and local meats. We see more of the wet aging in commodity type situations. And the difference is with dry aging, you take and you kill that animal, and that carcass hangs open in a cooler with air blowing around it, and it's dry. It's drying out. It's losing a little bit of moisture. It's also taking that time to go through rigor mortis, and for those enzymes in that carcass to start breaking down that animal, making it more tender. As it starts losing moisture, it also concentrates the flavors on that animal. So, an animal that hangs 7, 8, 10 days, 21 days, beef, it's going to come out there much lighter than it went in, but it's going to come out a different product. In commercial commodity type production, hanging a carcass takes up a lot of real estate. Real estate's expensive in walk-in coolers. And so they tend to do what's called wet aging, which is break that animal down into big chunks or primals, subprimals, and then they vacuum pack it and allow it to age in the vacuum packing. Serves the same purpose, but it doesn't allow the moisture to escape to the same degree that dry aging does. We tend to think of dry aging as kind of a value added step as well. We think a higher quality when you say I have a dry aged steak. When it comes to hang times, there's a lot of factors that go into it. Most importantly, it's cooler environment. Most of the processors are dialed in. They have their cooler set up so that they're at a proper humidity and a proper temperature for that hang time and for that rigor mortis and for that initial breaking down of enzymatic activity within the carcass to take place. When it comes to the animals themselves, a lot dictates how well they do is on what the finish of that animal is. If you have an animal that does not have a lot of fat cover to it, use beef for an example right now, because that's what we tend to really think about, the wide swing and dry aging times. So with beef, we see anywhere from 7 to 21 days with our processors, kind of depending on how much space they have and how busy they are, with 10 days probably being kind of an average that most of them work off of. If that animal doesn't have some fat cover to it, then what you have is you have the muscle start drying out. Fat dries out at a much slower rate than red meat muscle. And so if it doesn't have that fat cover on it, it will actually pull more moisture out of that animal. And when red meat gets pulled out, then you end up having to trim off more of that when that animal's broke down into retail cuts. And so you affect the amount of yield, not only due to moisture loss, but also to trim loss when you extend the aging time. And so ideally, if our goal is to have a good quality product, a good tenderness, somewhere in that 7 to 10 days is by scientific measurements says that is more than adequate to do it. It can be done, they can be killed one day, chilled, and then cut up and then wet aged, and they can be wet aged for that same period. But what's happening is that 7 to 10 days for beef tends to give it plenty of time. If you don't have that fat cover, though, you can dry it out. If you have good fat cover, there's some people that like to hang them for 21. And if you go into some of these fancy restaurants, they'll have where they'll pull the loins or these high-end cuts, and they'll dry age them for 40, 45, 50, 60 days sometimes. But when you look at what happens with those, uh, the loss on there is considerable. So from a meat quality standpoint, you want adequate hang time. 7 to 10 days on beef seems to be pretty adequate in a dry aging situation. Lamb, because of the smaller mass of that animal, it's going to dry out quicker. So you want your lamb and goat probably need to move through in a much quicker time frame. Anywhere from 2 to 5 days is adequate for them. And the same thing on pigs. And a lot of times with pigs, they'll just overnight, 2 days, sometimes three. But pig muscle structure, I didn't really dive into the muscle structure difference between white meat and red meat. But pigs have a white muscle structure, and beef and lamb and goats have red muscle. And there's actually physiological differences in those, which don't lead pork to be that great at hanging much longer than about 4 or 5 days. They can hang a week if as long as the conditions are right, but they tend to spoil a little bit quicker just due to that inherent differences in muscle structure. That answer the question?
So with chicken, so I know a lot of people, if they're processing on farm, they'll go ahead and slaughter in the morning and then turn right around and do cuts and cut ups. Is there, we always leave ours overnight and we dry chill them overnight. And but then I hear other people say you don't need to have any sort of a wait time. What are your thoughts on the wait time on between death and cut up?
So on the chicken end of things, and this is speaking from my experiences. When we do cut ups on our chickens, we actually just did cut up straight off hot carcass. And then so we would take our birds, we would knock the wings off of them, boneless breast and leg quarters, and then take those straight to ice. We played around with it to see, because we were doing the same thing. We were doing whole carcasses, chilling, coming back and cutting up the next day. We got in a hurry one day. We were running behind for some reason. If you farm, you know how that goes. And so we decided to try it, and we cut them straight off hot carcass, iced them down, gave them 6 or 8 hours of ice time, and pleased with the results. I mean, we never had issues with toughness. But also at that point in time, we could not hardly give a carcass away. And so our trade-off was we were popping the wings, breast, and leg quarters off, and then never eviscerating the animal. So we were saving that step and just discarding the whole carcass with the guts in tow. Because
Really?
it was cheaper for us, because I could not move a carcass to save my life. I mean, we would keep a couple for us and a few people that wanted them, but for most of the time, for us. But we tried it. We played with it on several occasions, and I never saw a toughness issue. Now, those were all Cornish cross. I know we've seen toughness differences in Freedom Rangers and more of the heritage type breeds, and so that may be something to consider, is the actual fat composition of that muscle, Cornish cross versus them. They tend to be quicker growing and more tender anyway, so maybe it just wasn't noticeable, and it would be more noticeable with a Freedom Ranger or heritage breed. So that was my experience with it. Now, most of the scientific stuff is going to tell you that rigor mortis really needs bone attachment to really run its course. But really, if you think about it, what we were doing on the carcasses, wings still had bone attachment on the wings, still had bone attachment on the thigh, leg and thigh. It was only the boneless breast that we were breaking that attachment, because what's happening is as rigor mortis sits in, those muscles contract. And so if they have bone structure to pull at from either end, it helps stretch and do that. If it doesn't, they just pull together like a bungee cord, knotted up. And so, in theory, what you're not getting is that pulling against a fixed point of a bone to provide some of that additional tenderness and breaking.
Right, and then when rigor mortis passes, then if it's
Yeah,
attached to
then
the
it
bone, then
relaxes.
it relaxes. Whereas if it's not attached to anything, it's sort of a big ball. Okay, I'm not going to try that. I'm not running that risk. There's no way.
Try one and just see sometime. If you're keeping one for yourself, part one out and see how it goes. You do
I
have
like
to.
the idea of not eviscerating. That I like a lot.
I did too, and it made us a whole lot quicker when we didn't have to
Oh, I
eviscerate.
bet. I bet. Um, Jerry Cohen has a question. How much can your production practices impact the length of time it takes to finish a cow? Or is this mostly preordained by the genetic makeup?
It can impact it significantly. All right, and so back to your genetic potential. What you really want to do is match up whatever your production system is. You need to make sure you've got genetics to match it. And so if your target is 100% grass grain finished, grass fed, grass finished, no grain, choice, nice beef to put on somebody's plate, you're probably going to want to stick with a small, moderate framed animal with good muscling that's an easy keeper. You probably not want to go out and get the biggest frame Charolais bull you can or steer you can find, try to finish in that scenario because it really comes down to a fact of smaller animals take less calories to get there. Think about the growth of an animal and the order of operations in that animal's growth, just like humans. What's the first thing they've got to do? They've got to build out a frame. So you've got to meet the nutritional requirements to build the frame of that animal. And if you're talking about building out a small Angus frame versus large Charolais frame, it's going to take a lot more calories to get that bone structure on those larger breeds of animals in place. Next thing to fill out is going to be that muscling component. And so once that frame starts getting to it at the point that it's maxed out, that muscling is going to start being the next priority nutritional wise. And so the calories are going to shift to that, and you're going to see that muscle start to develop. The next thing, once those two needs have been met, then you'll start seeing fat going in placing on the body. And so as that fat goes on, that's when your finishing on the beef is going to start playing out. And so if we've got a large frame animal, it's going to take way more calories to get that frame developed, and then it's got a lot more muscle to put on that larger frame. So we've now got to have that many more calories to get there. And then we got to have the excess calories to produce fat because fat's reserved energy. That's our survival tactic. So fat is there for survival. It's not there for taste in the wild. And so the last step of fat is that intermuscular marbling that we see in between the muscle fibers of the steak. And so if we've got to meet all of these nutritional requirements first, and when we take something like grass, we're taking a low nutrient dense food with high bulk, and the animal can only physically consume so much of that at any given time. And so we're limiting the limitation of the amount of nutrients that goes in them is strictly by how much they can hold. That's why feedlots have evolved in corn feeding because it's more bang for your buck. It's more punch. You put more calories in a smaller package, therefore they can eat more of them and they meet those nutritional requirements in order a whole lot quicker and they finish out quicker. So if you're doing production, you want to make sure your breeds, the smaller frame breeds are going to finish faster. If you're going with larger frame, those continental breeds, Simmental or Charolais, and those larger frame animals, you're just simply, you've got more calories to meet. Therefore, you're going to push that timeline out a little bit further. And then you also got to look at the quality of the feed that's going. If you're doing grass fed and grass finished, you're limited to how much they can hold. So you need to have top quality grasses that have all the nutrients you can pack into them. And so your grass management plays a big part in how well that works.
Whoops, I just shared the wrong screen. Sorry. And Jerry had a second question, which is, what is the age range you see for properly finished beef?
I've seen, anywhere from 18 months to 30 months seems to be the range. And it's a really wide range. I would venture to say most of our pasture raised folks are probably doing it somewhere between 22 and 26 months on an average. And that's, I say pasture raised being they're out on pasture, they're getting grass, they're getting hay, they may be supplemental feeding program along with that, but they're on pasture and they're not being confined and fed a a full heavy ration like a feedlot ration.
All right. Well, it looks like we have answered. Oh no, there's still. I think we've answered all the questions. All right. Jeff did say in the chat, though, I've heard that aging isn't needed with Cornish cross, but it's beneficial for the heritage chicken. So that falls with what you were saying. All right, so I have a few housekeeping items to share before we sign off today. A recording of this webinar and the slides will be available within the next day or two. These documents will be archived on our website, and I will email them to you all today or tomorrow. And I said we're going to do the slides, but I haven't taken that out of what I'm supposed to say. We don't do the slides anymore. So anyway, sorry about that. We'll be back next week with Unpacking the Schedule F, tips, terminology, and common questions when filing farm taxes, just in time for tax season. I will send links to this and all our upcoming webinars and other opportunities for farmers and ranchers in that follow-up email. I would also like to thank everyone out there in the audience, in addition to Lee. Lee, you've always got so much to share, and I know you're, I'm going to say the word loquacious again. I know in person you're not loquacious, but when it comes to talking about this kind of a topic, you have a lot to say, which is fantastic. So thank you, everybody, for your questions. And I hope you had a good experience today, and we will stay in touch and connect again soon. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.